you've been investing, doing my research, you've been investing since you've been a kid.
Oh
And
yeah.
can you speak to some of those lessons maybe that you spoke to your dad about early on?
Oh yeah, definitely. I actually started investing in mutual funds in middle school, so that was fun, and that was thanks to my dad. He introduced me to the whole idea. Bought some mutual funds, got to see them grow and experience what that was like. And I kind of got to see like the bear market of the early 2000s. I got to see the great financial crisis, and I got to experience those ups and downs and kind of see that, you got to be in it for the long term. You got to take the emotion out of it. Be willing to go through those things and not act impulsively. So that was all really good training ground for me. The other thing, one of my dad's lessons that he's always taught me is always don't bet against the government. It sounds strange, but
Yep.
the government will intervene when things look really terrible, and oftentimes those are the best times to invest because then that's when those turnaround times come. You look at the pandemic. Things were falling off the page in February, March 2020. And then the government stepped in a really big, huge way, and we had an amazing turnaround in the stock market. So that's the kind of stuff that can happen.
And jumping right into this, and forgive me, I'm going to kind of be all over the place because I'm very curious at
That's
speaking to you
fine.
too. It's the one thing I've noticed is like the bonds right now, the short-term bonds have these incredibly high interest rates, and they have a better interest rates than the long-term bonds. So it's like, is it speculative to, are they basically saying the outlook for the future doesn't look as good? And that's why the short-term bonds are like propped up right now? Since you mentioned
Yeah.
the government and, trust the government, what's your thoughts in general on that?
Well, that's kind of a very classic recessionary indicator when that happens. And typically, what that means, yeah, you're right, is that investors are kind of anticipating that things are going to deteriorate. And, that's because of what's going on right now with inflation and the Federal Reserve increasing rates. Now, every time this happens, they say it's different this time. So, and usually it's not.
Mm-hmm.
So, this is something we need
Right.
to pay attention to. Now, recessions come in all shapes and sizes. We don't know what the scope may be. It's very likely that one will be happening or maybe even is happening right now. But these are definitely things that we need to pay attention to. And while you mentioned bonds, for a long time, bonds were a very easy money-making instrument. You could depend on them reliably, because interest rates have been falling since the 1980s on a long-term basis. And now suddenly we have this environment where rates are rising. And I think a lot of people are feeling so much more pain right now because they're losing money on their bonds. When the rates go up or when yields rise, the value of bonds falls. And so that's a very interesting dynamic where we have right now stocks are falling in value and bonds are falling in value, even though, yes, now they are yielding more. And that is kind of a nice thing.
Yeah, and I kind of jumped ahead of the game, digging right into
Yeah.
tactical and talking about bonds. But I want to bring it back. So most of the audience listening are in the legal space, and walk me through how did you come to specialize in working with attorneys to really capture our audience, and then we'll bring it back to some strategy
Yeah.
specific to them.
It wasn't planned out this way. I kind of started my business. I had been a teacher. I had no idea how to market or build a business. It was all, learning as I went. And, I kind of was like, hey, anyone who wants to be a client, come on board, That's cool with me. But as I was reading and doing a lot of my own research, everything I was reading about, was telling me that it's important to specialize. I think you've said this, the riches are in the niches, And
Mm-hmm.
interestingly, that applies very well to the legal profession too. So my initial niche was kind of, people close to retirement who might really need and benefit from my services, really trying to plan for that transition into retirement. And, I was doing a lot of networking. I was in the chamber, I was in the local business associations. I was going to all the networking events and luncheons and this and that and the other. And I met a lot of attorneys. and many of them became clients. And so I got to know some of the issues that they dealt with, being business owners themselves, and some of their challenges. And as I started to think, my business started to grow, and I was like, okay, maybe I should really specialize on something very specific. And I was looking through my client list. I saw that I had a lot of attorneys, and I gotten to know them very well. And as I surveyed the landscape, I didn't see hardly any financial advisors that specialized in serving attorneys specifically. I see a lot of advisors that focus on business owners, retirees, maybe even doctors, but not very many in, focusing on the legal profession. And so I kind of saw it as, maybe sort of a wide open opportunity, and decided to go for it. So I started doing a lot of continuing ed programs through the local bar association. And then we started doing that online, and those were very successful. And it worked. Yeah.
I love that. And I also love that you had these experiences and you went a little broad and then found that you had, a segment here and pursued it, further. A lot of times people ask me like, hey, when should I niche or should I niche? I'm like, well, have these experiences and determine, where there's opportunity, what you have a passion for, where there's purpose. And I think that really highlights your journey.
Yeah.
And I guess so let's just big picture, how should attorneys think about investing? They're a particular different industry because of the succession planning issues. For example, like me in the agency space or SaaS, we could sell our business, right?
Yeah.
But the succession planning for attorneys is a little bit more challenging.
Yes.
A lot of times it's tied to their name. And so what would you say, let's just do a couple different avatars here. Let's just say you got a new solo practitioner. He just opened his firm. What should he be considering, he or she, when investing for their future?
When you're thinking about
Super broad.
There's a lot to unpack here. In the book, I talk about this. Succession planning begins from day one. Start thinking early on about how you want to position your brand as something that someone else will be able to purchase. If I'm going to name my business Darren Wurz, Attorney at Law, it's going to be very hard to sell that to somebody else. Whereas if I name it something maybe a little bit more generic, or something, not every jurisdiction allows trade names, but some do. If you can use a trade name, yeah, go for it, because that's going to be something that's more sellable. You want to tie the clients to the identity of the firm, more so than yourself. And that will make that transition a lot easier. So start thinking early on about how you can position yourself, position your brand in such a way that it will be easier to sell later on. I mean, you can always rebrand, but that's a challenge. That's difficult, and that's a lot of work to go through. So if you can start off from day one on the right footing and think about one day, this is something I want to sell, I think that's the way to go there. And I didn't get to your investing question.
Yeah.
I can dive into that a little bit if you'd like.
Continue.
Yeah, so
yeah, of course, continue.
This is big. You've got to invest from day one. I get it. You're starting a business. It's tough. There's startup costs, and maybe you have student loans. Maybe you have lots of things going on. But you got to pay yourself, and you've got to invest. Even if it's just a little bit, you've got to put some money into your investments, because you're going to be missing out on opportunities that you will never get again. The biggest thing that you have when it comes to your investments, the most valuable asset you have, is time. It's time in the market, and that really can't be made up for. The compounding, that is a very powerful tool, and time is what makes it work. So you got to get that money working for you as early as possible. You may not be able to invest a lot, but it's important to try and get that going, even early on in a small way.